From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. And thanks for joining us. Eric Atkinson here. During his weekly segment on the grain market trends, K-State's Dan O'Brien will remark today on the developments that led to the fall-off in grain prices this week, with the notable exception of wheat prices, which managed to hold relatively steady as the Kansas wheat harvest is underway. Also today, K-State's Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz will look at managing sidedress nitrogen applications to corn, emphasizing the timing of those treatments and the end source selection. Dorivar also talks about sidedressing sulfur and chloride, along with the nitrogen where needed. And awaiting to take a look at the Kansas agricultural weather outlook, K-State's Mary Knapp. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today. Thanks once again for tuning in. You're listening to Agriculture Today. It's been awfully rough going for the grain markets the past several days. We'll capture what's going on there and talk about what might be ahead for grain prices, as well as Mike Side with us now in studio is Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, a little weather, a little political chatter, a lot of things contributing to the pressure brought to bear on prices this last week.
Yes, on Thursday, we saw a limit down 40 cents on corn, and that left us down to $6.33 in July corn, $5.32 for geese. Those numbers, again, the July 21 corn number was down 66 cents from what it was a week ago. The Deese corn number had been about $6.16.5, dropped to $5.32.50, about 85 cents thereabouts. So we saw that drop in the corn, and also saw even more of a drop on the soybean side, over $2 on the July contract. Closed on Thursday, $13.29.75. That's down from $15.44 a week ago on Thursday. November soybeans, $12.52 down from $14.59.5. So major hits. One thing on the soybean side, again, we're seeing the South American export numbers come in, and when we're seeing such ongoing support for beans on a weekly basis, we had new news every day coming in on soybean exports. So it's interesting. Again, the hard red winter wheat market hasn't been immune to the volatility, but when you look at where it ended up on Thursday the 17th, as opposed to where it was on Thursday the 10th, it was basically level to down a penny. So of any of these commodities, in the midst of the hard red winter wheat harvest, you think we'd be crashing in terms of hard red winter wheat, but it's not. And I would say that happening in light of okay, but not tremendous exports for either hard red or all combined wheat. So again, it just opens up the wheat feeding hypothesis in western Kansas. And again, you see Garden City spot cash corn prices $6.88, hard red winter wheat in Garden City at $5.75, so over $1 lower. It sure seems to be an opportunity there. One thing that's happened also is as the corn futures markets has moved around, you've seen now in some areas of the state cash spot grain sorghum prices have moved back above the corn price. And just look at Colby, cash corn, $6.38, cash grain sorghum, $6.48, forward contract price, $5.25 for corn for fall harvest, $5.83 in the Colby area. That's the top bid that we've seen amongst a handful of elevators. It's interesting. Salina corn price, $6.33 still yesterday, $6.13 sorghum, but the new crop forward contracts for corn, $5.23, and for sorghum, $5.98. So, and that's really a pattern you're seeing across the state. Generally, we've been seeing in most of these places, great cash corn and great cash sorghum prices, and really good new crop prices as well, but still new crop bids for sorghum being tangibly above that of corn. So just interesting to watch. Spot cash prices just running across the state for wheat, $5.55, Colby Salina, $6.14, export-oriented. And on that Salina bid, there's one major elevator that's up there at $6.14, and the rest of them are about $5.50, $5.60, whatever. So that one elevator's probably filling some export contracts. $5.84 Topeka, $5.75 Garden City, $5.84 Hutchinson, $5.55 down in Columbus and Southeast.
Great prices to hear as the combines are off and running.
Combines are coming. I would say that it would be good for us to take a look at where the limit move for corn, the major drop-off for soybeans, where that's at, where that puts us in terms of price trends.
Well, what stands out to you as the catalyst for those fall-offs?
Well, in the news seems to be rumors of moisture coming, and we're going to come back to that. Mm-hmm. Also rumors about Federal Reserve having some actions to eventually raise interest rates that would impact the value of the U.S. dollar. It's off down there. I think they're talking about something in 2023, but it affects the psyche of the market. So, in our notes, you've got, if you're looking for hints from the financial market charts as to what's going on, you don't see a lot that actually happened yesterday. Not a lot of movement, and I hope I'm not missing something, other than the U.S. dollar is hanging around pretty low, and it started to move a little bit higher, of course, for commodities, particularly ag commodities. That would be a harbinger of higher dollar coming in and affecting things. And I'd also, if you have time, like to talk about what's happening in the ethanol market at the end of all this. But the drop-off for corn, down to $6.33 on the July contract yesterday. We'd gotten up to about $7.30 for a while back at the end of April, on into early May. Really, chart-wise, if we would drop below about $6, then you're starting to worry more. Really, we're just in the bounds of volatility right now, even with a 40-cent drop-off. For soybeans, we did drop off down to $13.29 3/4 yesterday from highs of about $16.70 or so. Pretty serious. It went down past $13.60. If it gets down to about $12.70, $12.80, then you're moving below at least areas where the market's been before. I think the bigger issue right now is worries about exports and things in general. However, if we maintain temperatures at or within shouting distance of these for any period of time, then I see the downward moves that we've had here in these last few days, but we maintain high temperatures. It's a different deal. You asked for the factors, and also there's some talk from the Chinese about the need to have lower corn prices. So that talk seemingly had affected some of the psyche of buyers of ag commodities. I understand all that, but I look at the weather maps and
do you think that's going to be the factor of prominence for the long pull?
We have sold the ideas and discussion in the market of what might happen. We're going to have to deal with the reality that well over 90% of Iowa is pretty dry, worse up into the Dakotas, parts of Nebraska, Michigan, Wisconsin. So really some challenging areas and just some dry areas starting to come in southwest Kansas too.
One thing that you did want to talk in greater detail is, in fact, what's going on with biofuels. A lot of discussion at the federal level on policy this past week and some potential uncertainties weaving their way into the market psyche, as you put it. How do you read that scene right now, Dan?
Well, I think that it's not so much the ethanol industry, but those that buy ethanol must be worried about dry conditions and they're not so worried about high corn prices. They're worried about constrained ethanol availability. And when they see these same maps that you and I are looking at, et cetera, they think back to about 2012 when, in order to fulfill their renewable fuel standard blending requirements, they had to buy high-priced RINs. And RINs are basically registered identification numbers for different gallons of ethanol. And companies have these RINs. If we don't have the physical product there, a blender can buy RINs and come in and still blend motor fuel. They'll blend on paper, is my understanding of it. So with recent announcements by the federal government that they're considering some relief for these blenders. We haven't seen the ethanol price fall off. In yesterday's close, it's about $2.46. But what's fallen off is the RIN market. It lost from around $2.46, $2.50, something like that, dropped about 80 cents to $1. So if that relief comes, that takes some of the pressure off, some of the steam off of the RIN market. I think that we are looking at these markets. We're looking at these production prospects, and we have concerns. Those folks are looking at the same factors. They're worried about a short corn crop and constrained ethanol production at high-priced corn. But it's not the corn they're worried about. They're worried about having adequate supplies coming through those plants so that they have ethanol to blend. And if they don't, then they have to go to the RIN market. They're trying to position themselves ahead of what could happen if we have a short crop this year. My understanding is they're taking risk management moves to protect themselves from having to buy extremely high-priced RINs to fulfill their blending requirements.
Just another of the multitude of moving parts in these trades.
Major issues.
When we're resigned to the volatility in the markets, this isn't going to change anytime soon, Dan.
Well, the things that had caused the markets to go down yesterday are, again, China's announcement, the promise maybe of some rainfall coming, again, lower U.S. soybean exports, et cetera. So we sold the hope that we'll have rain. We'll have to actually have that rain. It just puts us all that much more in a weather market situation here in the U.S. as we go forward for the next, well, here we are in mid-June. We got to get through July and August. And there's a lot of potential volatility still ahead of us.
Well, we'll see what this next trading week brings, and we'll talk about it this time next Friday. Thanks, Dan, as always.
Thank you, Eric.
Along with us each week to get into the grain market factors, that's Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Agriculture Today will be back after this. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network. Agriculture Today continues now. These next few moments are for you corn growers on your crop nutrient management, and the next phase of that might well be side dressing nitrogen on your corn, and maybe an element or two in addition to that. We'll talk about it all now with Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz. He's a crop nutrient specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and the corn is at a point now where its nutrient needs are starting to pick up. Dorivar?
Yes, Eric. We are to the point now that a significant amount of the corn is at the V6, V8 growth stage, and certainly once you get to that point, the uptake of nitrogen in particular is happening fairly quickly, plant growth and uptake of nitrogen. So it is something that we need to keep in mind. Obviously, side dressing, we want to provide that nitrogen and be ready for that rapid uptake. And so now is the time to provide that nitrogen, especially in situations where maybe we don't have much nitrogen already there. When we talk about timing, we often basically have a couple of different situations. One of them is where we have most of the nitrogen already maybe pre-planned and maybe trying to complement some additional nitrogen, especially if we think about potential losses of nitrogen that happen maybe early this spring. And so that's one situation. And the other situation will be cases where we are relying on that sidedress application primarily to provide most of the nitrogen. So in that kind of situation, of course, we really want to make sure and have that nitrogen ready and provide enough nitrogen to the plant as the rapid uptake is happening. Now, going back to the situation where we have maybe already a fair amount of the nitrogen, maybe 70% or even close to 100% of the nitrogen from spring or even fall apply in hydros, for example, in that kind of situation, we do have a bigger window, and this is something that we need to keep in mind. We're talking about growth stage of V8 maybe at this point, but in reality, we do have enough nitrogen there that we can actually extend that a little bit. And we've done some research there looking at what would be the latest we can go with side dressing or providing additional nitrogen in season. And the window is pretty big, really, and we can get even to up to tassel in many cases and provide additional nitrogen at that point, and the corn's still going to respond to that nitrogen, especially in situations where we are maybe a little bit deficient. And so again, going back to monitoring nitrogen cases where we suspect some potential losses of nitrogen, again, we do have a window of application in season that we can take advantage of that either now or even later, again, as we are monitoring that nitrogen status.
Dorivar, you've mentioned losses of nitrogen. We saw corn planted and then, in some cases, waterlogged for a time. Is that a scenario where one might want to revisit where they're at with their in needs upon side dressing?
Absolutely. That's one situation where now side dressing and in-season additional nitrogen may be needed. Now, that will not be the case for all situations, and that's where we need to evaluate every field. Those cases where we have more of a sandier soil, we have potential for leaching. That's one situation. You mentioned waterlogged condition, heavy clay. That will be another situation where we may have some denitrification losses. But here's a key factor that we need to keep in mind here is the source of nitrogen that we use this spring and whether that nitrogen was actually applied in the spring or maybe last fall. Essentially, how long that nitrogen's been already there. Is that nitrogen in the nitrate form, which again will be subject to leaching or denitrification, or again if we have anhydrous applied in the spring, which usually will tend to be more stable. And so again, we need to evaluate every situation there, but certainly we did have some significant rainfall this spring, and in some cases we probably need to think about some additional nitrogen depending on specific cases.
And for this project, the nitrogen source of choice, well, it's one or the other, but based around urea, you say?
Yes, as we're thinking about in-season application, typically we'll be thinking about urea or UAN primarily. And so here's something that we need to think about also about potential losses. If we have, higher temperature, of course, windy situations, we may have the potential for volatilization. So if we're thinking about nitrogen application as a urea or UAN in the next few weeks, we need to keep this in mind. And so what options we have here, nitrification inhibitors, NBPT is one common one that we use. It's been around for a long time, and it works pretty well. And so we need to think about this, the use of urease inhibitors, especially if we don't have any rainfall or irrigation way to basically incorporate that nitrogen in the near future. And so in that kind of situations, we need to think about, again, urease inhibitors. Urea will be worse, of course, because it's 100% urea. But in the case of UAN, that volatilization potential is lower. We do have just 50% of urea in UAN. Placement, of course, is a big factor playing in this. In the case of UAN, we typically going to maybe dribble that UAN between the rows, and in that case, we are concentrating that nitrogen and already moving maybe a little bit in the soil. So all of that is contributing to, minimizing the potential losses in the case of UAN.
In the case where there might have been losses of N previously applied in the spring, and nobody can say for certain what that level of loss was, how does one arrive at an appropriate side dress N rate to compensate for those losses?
Yes, and obviously that's very difficult to know exactly how much nitrogen we lost. Some of the work we've done in the past, we typically see that we tend to capture most of the potential response in the range of 30 to 50 pounds, especially even if we're going later in the season. We've done some applications getting to the reproductive stage, and again, in that range of about 40 pounds, we typically capture all of the potential response already. And so I will not consider higher applications, and again, thinking about potential losses, it will also be very unusual to see much higher losses, especially depending on application types and forms of fertilizer that we use this spring.
As you're inferring, placement is paramount here with side dressing nitrogen on corn.
Yes, absolutely. That would be another key factor here. And again, if we're thinking about things like residue presence, for example, obviously we're getting additional benefit from dribbling that UAN in concentrated bands and minimizing contact there.
Well, nitrogen is the featured nutrient, obviously, but you say, Dorivar, that there's been some interest of late in whether other nutrients would be of benefit side-dressed along with nitrogen, and one of those would be sulfur, you say.
Yes, and this is something that we're seeing more and more in corn in recent years. Certainly this spring is something that I saw in many fields, a little bit more of a sulfur deficiency issue showing up. And so we need to pay attention to that as well. In many cases, maybe we already took care of that with pre-plant applications, depending on the source that we are using. But if we are seeing some potential sulfur deficiencies, and if we are planning to do sidedress, this is the time to take advantage of that, especially in liquid fertilizers. We can easily blend some thiosulfate, for example, with UAN and do some applications. We don't need high rates. Typically in the range of about 20 pounds is all we need. But again, it's a good time to take advantage of that. And in recent weeks, I've seen some cases of some producers who are planning to do already sidedressing, seeing some sulfur deficiency issues, and certainly take advantage of that application for sulfur. It is a mobile nutrient, especially in the thiosulfate, for example, and so certainly will be just like nitrogen in terms of moving to the root zone whenever we have that rain or irrigation.
What would be the tip-off that corn stand is in need of sulfur? Is the plant showing at all in that respect?
Yes, and this is where it's can be a little confusing because deficiency symptoms can look a little bit like nitrogen. It's yellowing as well, but we tend to see more of that yellowing happening in the younger leaves compared to nitrogen, and so that's where we tend to see more of the symptoms showing up. Tissue testing, of course, is a big one. We need to be, if we are suspecting some of these deficiencies showing up, tissue test is really an excellent tool that we can use and works really well for sulfur in particular.
Any other nutrients that would be suitable for side dressing at this point, Dorivar?
Yes, we really talk about the mobile nutrients, and especially as we go central and moving west in the state, we tend to see more response also to chloride. So if we are thinking about potential sidedress application, and that's maybe including sorghum as well, we may see a value there in adding chloride. It is, again, a mobile nutrient, which means can be applied in season and basically available to the crops. And so that would be another nutrient to think about. It's not always needed across the state, but again, as we're thinking about especially central and western, we may see some value there.
Several things to consider, but back to that original point, timing is everything here with this application, you say.
Timing is a key point here. We need to think about that, providing that nutrient there. I know there's many considerations there from the nutrient uptake standpoint, but also the logistics. Obviously, are we getting later? We need higher clearance equipment to be able to get there and do that type of application. And so it's not just the nutrient requirements, but also what's going to be working for each operation. And those are considerations, obviously, to keep in mind.
Well, K-State over the years has accumulated a fair amount of information on the merits of side dressing corn at the appropriate stage of plant development, and we're right there now for most fields around Kansas. So touch base with your local Extension agricultural agent. Go online to the agronomy website out of K-State for more on all of that. And Dorivar, thank you for the timely word right here.
Thank you.
He's a crop nutrient specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz. And we'll be back with more after these moments away. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. And welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Coming your way next, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, after a meeting on prospects for passage of a farm labor immigration bill on Wednesday, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack said he made a commitment to, quote, get this done. Vilsack made the statement to reporters after he met with Senators Michael Bennet, a Democrat from Colorado, and Mike Crapo, a Republican from Idaho, as well as farm lobbyists in the Senate Agriculture Committee hearing room to discuss how to push through the Senate a bill that would allow current undocumented farm workers to stay in the country and to bring in more workers. The House passed a bill, but the Senate so far has been resistant to considering the House bill, and no Senate bill has been released. Vilsack said that both farmers and agribusiness executives are increasingly concerned about their current and future workforce. Now, Bennett, who appeared with Vilsack to speak to reporters after the meeting, said it was impressive that both the agricultural industry and the United Farm Workers had come together on the House bill. Also, Bennett and Vilsack appeared together at that news conference. Crapo was not there. Bennett and lobbyists who spoke after Vilsack left the event said that Crapo has committed to helping gather Republican support for the bill, but Bennett said he needs help to convince 60 senators to vote for the bill. Farm lobbyists told reporters they are focused in getting a bill through the Senate yet this year. The gap between those who have high-speed internet access and those who don't appears to be wider than previously thought. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
A new broadband coverage map just released by the White House shows far more Americans than previously estimated do not have high-speed internet access. The new map uses more sources of data than previous maps, and on that score,
you're going to see maps from some of the private sector folks who tell you that there's a 90% coverage.
But Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack told a Senate Appropriations panel that in some cases private maps claimed full area coverage if only one person in the region had access. So Vilsack says actual coverage, in other words,
real service as opposed to sort of service on paper,
is not 90%.
But the reality is about 64% of America has adequate access. That means that a large part of America does not.
With the biggest coverage gaps in rural areas, Vilsack said with the current money being spent every year to close those gaps,
it will take many, many, many years to actually get the job done.
He says what's needed is to get some
serious resources behind this effort.
At least $100 billion. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And this note from Capitol Hill, the Senate Agriculture Committee has now set a hearing for next Wednesday, the 23rd of June, to examine cattle market transparency and prices from cattle producer to consumers. The move was welcomed by Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, who has been a longtime critic of the U.S. cattle market situation and consolidation in the industry. Kansas Wheat has released its second report on wheat harvest progress in the state. The triple-digit temperatures and a steady Kansas breeze has prompted wheat harvest activity in southern Kansas. The Farmers Co-op Grain Association in Conway Springs reported initial wheat cutting started last Friday in Sumner County and is now in full swing. Producers reporting some disease pressure from stripe rust. And with about a week to go there, the yields are similar to last year. Test weights at 60 pounds per bushel or above. Beechner Grain, covering the southeastern portion of the state, President and CEO Gary Beechner reporting harvest starting on Monday in Labette and Wilson counties, spreading to Montgomery, Neosho, Allen counties on Tuesday. It wasn't until Wednesday, though, when harvest across that area really got rolling. He says that the hot, dry, windy weather is helping dry down the wheat. Moisture's consistently around 12%, test weights averaging 61 pounds per bushel. And early protein reports in south central Kansas variable, lower than average and slightly lower than last year, with averages of 10 to 11.5%. That's according to Kansas Wheat CEO Justin Gilpin. He said they're hearing of fields early this harvest on the low end of the range, but a few as high as 12% protein. And according to producers, the early variability is due to weather impacts and management factors. And that leads us into this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marsha Boswell.
Wheat farmers who join the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers by June 30th will have a chance to win a Grain Sense Analyzer protein tester valued at $4,300, donated by Elevate Ag. Using advanced near-infrared technology, this handheld device can deliver a quick measurement of protein content and other data in just a few seconds, providing the user with profitable information for marketing his or her wheat crop. Join or renew at kswheat.com/join to be entered into the drawing. As wheat harvest is beginning to ramp up in south central Kansas, it's more important than ever for farmers to know the protein content of their crop. Typically, in years with higher wheat yields, that could mean a slightly lower protein content. According to Justin Gilpin, CEO of Kansas Wheat, we are starting to see some protein distinctions in the marketplace, where there are going to be some premiums in place. We're seeing that with the Kansas City hard red winter wheat futures contract and the Minneapolis spring wheat contract, with over $1 spread between the two. Gilpin pointed out the importance of knowing the protein content in your fields and segregating to capture value in those higher proteins. As Kansas wheat farmers are more intensively managing their wheat, having more immediate information on quality and protein from the field can help with marketing decisions. Gilpin said for farmers that have the ability to know what their protein is at harvest time, it could be a year they can capture a little extra value. We're certainly seeing more locations across the state that have incorporated protein testers at their sites. Going across the scale, I think you'll probably see more co-ops and delivery points that are measuring protein. It's important to know what you have and to try to capture value when you can, if you have that capability with storage and being able to deliver to a market that's going to reward for it. The GrainSense Analyzer is a battery-powered handheld grain analyzer with advanced near-infrared technology. It can give an accurate analysis through a simple app on your phone within a few seconds, with only about 40 kernels of wheat. It provides a quick measurement of protein content, moisture, oil content, and carbohydrates, allowing the user to sort their wheat into storage by quality and adjusting in real time to the most profitable opportunities. To help members get a better idea of their protein, the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers has teamed up with Elevate Ag to give away one GrainSense analyzer this harvest. Farmers who join the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers or renew their membership by June 30th will be entered into a drawing to win one of these quality analyzers with delivery on or about July 1st. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And this is Agriculture Today. Capping off this Agriculture Today, it's our opportunity once again to talk Kansas agricultural weather. Across the way is climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension. Mary, the upside of this past week, conditions allowed for field work and the first good run at the wheat harvest, but still the heat has been on, with records set around Kansas.
Right. There will undoubtedly be a few locations that set a new record high for their day. Manhattan yesterday hit 102, which is a little bit on the warm side. It won't be a record, but it's certainly warm. As you noted, it has been favorable for wheat harvest. It also has been really favorable for getting that hay up. It's been a very trying spring trying to get that out. Didn't have enough consistently dry days in order to actually do that cutting. So it's a bit of a relief to get some of that up and put away, especially since hay demands are likely to be very high because you go north of us into Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. They've had very, very dry conditions, and they're not going to have much in the way of hay production, and they haven't really had for a while, and they've been feeding a lot. So, again, that's going to put pressure on those hay supplies.
But the real worry this week, Mary, has been the stress brought to bear on livestock, and that relates, among other things, to the nighttime temperatures holding up higher than usual.
Right. We've had a lot of, again, due to the wet conditions we had in May, and to start June, there's a lot of moist soils out there. There's a lot of actively growing vegetation. All of that is increasing the humidity and making that dew point very high. When you have that elevated dew point, that also means that your nighttime low temperatures are not going to drop as far as we typically would expect. So you could feel more comfortable with a high of 95 if your nighttime low got down into the 60s. If that nighttime low stays at 75, you're just not getting a lot of relief.
It'd be appropriate here, Mary, to remind folks about that informative tool that you maintain on the Mesonet website to keep them fully in the know on the heat stress that's occurring with their livestock.
Right. There's a tool called the Animal Comfort Index. It's under the Agricultural tab. One nice feature of it is not only can you see the current conditions, but you can graph for the past week, because sometimes that stress is cumulative, and you can see not just how much stress are they under today, but how much have they endured in the last week.
It's something to use for the here and now at mesonet.ksu.edu. And outside of the random pop-up storm, precious little in the way of moisture this week.
Right. There's very little moisture at all. The three western divisions averaged 0, as did the central division. There was a little bit in the south central and north central, but the areas that really benefited were the northeast and the southeast. Southeast, again, was very isolated. So we had, for example, our Uniontown Mesonet station that had over 3 inches, but you get to, say, Parsons, and they basically had nothing out of that. And that's the kind of randomness we've been seeing, particularly in the southeast. With the northeast, we were very fortunate that a lot of that rain fell in the areas that were abnormally dry, and so that resulted in some improvement in the U.S. Drought Monitor in that part of the state. More of the abnormally dry conditions sort of shifted closer to the Nebraska border and cleared up in the southern parts of Brown and Donovan County.
But we didn't see the drought monitor worsen much elsewhere in the state this week anyway?
There was a little bit of incursion, again, of the abnormally dry, that pocket that had shown up in southeastern Kansas or remained in southeastern Kansas, expanded a little bit westward, and we saw it creep up into south central Kansas along the Oklahoma border. If we don't get rain in the next week, then we're likely to see a much larger expansion of that abnormally dry conditions. But if we look at the year to date, we are actually above normal in most of the state. There are a few divisions where it's at 95, 96% of normal, which again is close enough to what you would usually expect that it doesn't really merit calling it drought, particularly when you look at the conditions being faced to our west and to our north.
Well, to the outlook, and thankfully this is short-term heat. It's going to come to an end after another couple of days.
Right. What we're looking at is that a cool front will kind of start its way on Saturday, where we drop down below those 100-degree readings, but we'll really get the biggest push Sunday night into Monday morning. Sunday, we're looking at highs in the 100-degree range. On Monday here in Manhattan, we're not expecting to get above 80. So quite a shift in that. What will also be welcome is that as we move through the rest of the week, we'll get back more to seasonal temperatures in the upper 80s, low 90s, but our nighttime lows will be more tolerable, with most of them being in the mid-60s to lower 60s. And that, again, will be a welcome break. The July outlook was released yesterday, and that is fairly neutral. It's equally likely to be warmer or cooler than normal and wetter or drier than normal. So we're kind of squeezed between the heat to our north and west and the coolness to the southeast, where they've had plentiful moisture. We'll have to see how the tropical season develops, because that will influence how our rain chances might develop.
And for the more immediate, the moisture chances, well, part of that may hinge on, in fact, a Gulf Coast system that's starting to churn down there.
Well, we do have a fairly good chance of moisture on Monday. Here in Manhattan, it's 50%. It'll vary across the state. But we could see more production if that tropical system that is developing in the Gulf of Mexico shifts a little bit further west. Right now, the target landfall is somewhere along the Louisiana coast. If it migrated a little bit further west and came ashore along the Texas Gulf Coast, that would bring more of that moisture into the Central Plains and up our chances of having a more substantial rain event.
Mary, thanks for coming over. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension. And likewise, thanks to you for tuning in, and the best to you this weekend. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.